So we have a fireside chat, or can we already say afternoon today, together with Marc from SumUp, and the topic of today's fireside chat is actually sharing stories of massive fundraising. There are very, very few companies based here in Berlin that have actually raised as much as SumUp has, so that's pretty legendary. And to I guess, start off, it'd be great to sort of learn a little bit about SumUp. I guess we all know it, but just to get a quick overview about SumUp and a bit more about you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thrilled to be here. I'm wondering if you're from Berlin, whether you haven't heard the story yet, but still glad to see you, and I'll try to make this as much fun and as interesting as possible. Marc, founder of SumUp. For the last 6-7 years, I've also been the CFO. We started about 11 years ago, and now we just hired a professional CFO, but I'll remain founder and still continue building the business. I also am not a big fan of the title, to be honest, because I think it's very, very sad for the startups that the attention only arrives when you raise funds, and raising more funds is better, because what we're actually here to do and what we're getting paid for is to build a great company and solve the problem for our merchants, and that's much more valuable. At the same time, I didn't come up with a good title, so we picked that one. But we want to talk more about the ecosystem, fundraising, the investor-startup relationship, and so on. Plus, I would love to introduce Shika. Maybe you want to talk about yourself, because as an investor, you're nearly as important for the ecosystem as the startups are, if not more.
Well, as I say, it always takes two to tango. So it definitely makes sense for both of the sides of the table to come together. And I actually have been on the other side of the table, so your side, for far longer than I've been an investor. So I'm at Balderton now for 2 years, a principal here, and lead the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, on the ground for the fund. And actually prior to that, I was an entrepreneur myself for 5 years in India, but only built a company that was worth $500 million. So by far not as big as yours, but also quite fun to see those ups and downs from that period. And I think one thing that really stuck with me is the learning that building a company is not a linear path. And so there are plenty of ups and downs. And speaking of which, could you share a bit more around the ups and downs at SumUp, in particular in terms of fundraising? Were there any situations where you felt like, oh my God, I'm not sure if this round is going to come through? What did you do?
So first of all, investors that have been founders before are much more valuable than the other investors. If you're a young startup out there, please make sure at least some people on the investor team have some founding experience, because so from our experience, we started out fundraising in 2012, raised something that was a bit of a pretty crazy round back in 2012, raising 10 million at like a 50 million valuation, which obviously by now, 2021, not so spectacular anymore. And that was only on pretty much a pitch deck. And then within like half a year after starting, we raised the Series B, and literally not a ton of things worked within SumUp. So we were kind of having a card where they didn't accept Visa cards. We had like unit economics that were easily in the 100-year plus payback periods. A lot of the processes were not great. So we literally said, let's stop and really rebuild the business with a focus on unit economics, how to be successful, and so on. And then we had like a number of, I would say, relatively dry years, because I think the investor ecosystem either placed a bet on us or on some of our competitors, or decided that the market is not attractive as it is. So we're literally stumbling from like one bridge round to the other, getting like, I don't know, 5 million in 2013 or 14, where we nearly died on, another 5 million in 2015 that we nearly died on. Also did plenty of mistakes. For example, I personally, since I came from Groupon, hired like 120 people sales team before we had product market fit. Not something you should do.
Expensive.
Expensive. We also launched in 10 European markets and then went to Russia and to Brazil. Russia is the only country we ever left after 2-3 years, because we lost a lot of money and didn't get anywhere. Plus, it was a little bit too much for a Series B startup. So there were plenty of life and death situations, I would say, in those 3-4 years. And then 2016, we merged with P11, at which point we were operating expense break even. So that gave us a little bit of freedom and more support from the investor base. But we were only like 150 people at that time. And from there, we then went very much into hyper growth, raised a lot of debt to finance that growth, and went from like 20 million revenue to like probably around $500 million today.
So just to be clear, I mean, very exciting, and I always felt like that there has to be a grain of difficulty in everyone's journey, and well, it's good to hear that there has been a grain of difficulty in yours and in SumUp's journey, but ultimately that's what really forms and shapes the DNA of firms. I guess one obvious question is, what really changed from you going from bridge round to the tipping point of hypergrowth? When did you know you're at the tipping point?
Well, I think the reality is you mainly know when you're not at the tipping point, because that's usually pretty clear. And the reality is you just need to kind of keep on trying and be resilient and build all of those things. I think there are very few startup stories that do exactly what's written in the business plan that go absolutely amazing within the first 12 to 36 months of founding. Most of them have pretty much up and down ranges, because if it would be easy, everybody would do it. And it's actually funny, we probably have like 30 or so companies that have been started out of SumUp. And it's very interesting to see because, for example, in Brazil, we had kind of instant product market fit and kind of scaled from day one. So the original CEO of Brazil, as well as his second command, all started companies, assuming that product market fit was given, because they never learned anything else, and then just want to scale basically from day one, and then realized how tough the 2-3 years were to get to product market fit out there.
Super, and just coming back a bit more to the topic of our chat, which is a looming decacorn. So right now, SumUp is valued at a whopping $8 billion. That's quite a lot. And so I guess the last valuation was dictated with the round last summer, which was led by Bain Capital. So how much have you raised in total over the years?
So while we used a lot of money, we've been relatively frugal on equity. So we raised maybe like 120 million or so until 2016. And then, given the crazy financing world out there, we actually found debt providers that were willing to understand our unit economics and how we invested in growth. And then we did like an 80 million debt round, topped this up to a 330 million debt round, topped this up to 750 billion, and now are like at $1 billion plus in debt. And throughout this period from 2016 to today, obviously we've been in contact with the investor community, but there was never any opportunity, because I always said, look, this is the cost of capital I get for debt. Why should I take your money at 3 to 5x expectation return? So we didn't really need the money. And the reason why we did a round in the summer of 22 is to kind of first give our existing investors a bit of peace of mind, give our lenders peace of mind, and really show that SumUp is able to raise even in the shittiest of environments, which mainly worked because it wasn't possible to invest the last 6 years before. And that's where a lot of people were pretty excited.
Interesting. So did you really feel that last summer was already the most difficult in terms of environment? Or how do you think about your valuation now? Do you feel it is a valuation that will be confirmed in a potential upcoming round? Or do you think this may change?
So I think it's definitely not fun out there, the ecosystem. I think it doesn't matter which round you raise at. I think early stage AI is still a space that works pretty well. But definitely the growth space, there isn't. I think there's still a big disconnect between bid and ask prices. So there's just not a ton of liquidity out there. I would argue when we did the round last year, most of our comparables already dropped like 60-70% from the peak in 2021. So to me, it feels like it's a pretty fair assessment of the value, and we're still growing like 40% plus year over year since then. So I would feel relatively comfortable, at least with the absolute total amount of money. Whether the multiple also keeps on growing from them, that one remains to be seen.
Cool. So moving towards decacorn status, how does that feel?
Who cares? The reality is, as a founder, I'm literally doing this since 2012, and I'm mainly following our vision where building a world where everybody can build a thriving business. And I've been speaking at events like this one when we were kind of struggling for survival 2 years in to today. So it's not like there's this break point from your seed stage startup to slightly more successful. And it's just a journey that we are on, I would say.
That's fair. That's very interesting. I guess one big piece that we've actually been thinking about a lot, and I'd love to hear your view, you have raised loads of capital in debt and equity. And so it's clear that this capital is not something that has come purely out of the Berlin ecosystem. And so just assuming that this loads of capital, you need to start to look elsewhere. How do you feel about that, and how maybe helpful was your existing cap table, your early stage cap table, in really making those mega funding rounds and debt raises happen?
So I think we can all be pretty open that the Berlin ecosystem doesn't have the funding capacity you need anywhere after Series B. I think by now we have a pretty good ecosystem of, let's say, Series E, Series B kind of investors, a lot of former founders that give back to the ecosystem and somehow reinvest their successes there. So I think up to a certain, like for the product market fit space, and maybe the first kind of scaling, it works, but thereafter you certainly have to go outside of Europe, of Germany, probably to the UK, if not even further. I think for us, we had like very good support in our Series A. In the Series B already, we kind of had to, we got Groupon and BBVA as both non-German companies in there. And thereafter, I think was a real struggle to raise funds. I think there was very good help from our investors that kind of showed us that they were willing to continue to invest, subject to us finding somebody else. It's also very helpful. And then we were literally scraping all over the world for investors, where one round was led by some Russian investors that want to merge into our Russian company, and the other one by a Swiss company that literally we had to move the headquarters to Switzerland because they could only invest in Swiss companies. So those kind of investors were out there at that time. And then from there on, once we hit the debt markets, we pretty much entered the world of high finance, and we have like the Bain, Goldman, Temasek, all the biggest capital pools in the world on the cap table, or on the debt side.
So in the end, did you have to go international in terms of looking for fundraising a lot sooner than you would have liked?
I think the moment you need a triple-digit amount of million euros, you're not going to find that in Germany.
Fair. That's why Balderton has a growth fund. So
which is not really a German fund either.
Exactly.
But Shika is here, so that's already a start. Having the American funds
here
in Germany is already a plus.
Yes. That's great. And sort of speaking a bit more around, well, your experience and what you would like to sort of give to the next generation of budding entrepreneurs, specifically for business models where they already know, okay, this is going to require a lot of capital. We just heard a panel more around the area of carbon capturing and how sort of sustainability as a whole is also going to play a big role in our future going forwards. And there will also be pockets of funding required for that, big pockets of funding. So what is your advice to entrepreneurs who know that they have to raise a lot?
I think I would separate those two, between one, raising a lot, and the impact funding, because I do think carbon credits and all that, the ESG space needs a lot more funding, and I don't think we have found good working models that work with capitalism to fully associate enough money to that sector. We actually pledged 1% of our revenue to ESG causes and go into entrepreneurship, education, and environment. And I think on the other side, the reality is, I mean, we all know on any fundraise, you only get enough run rate for the next 12 to 18 months anyways, because your investors usually want to control what happens afterwards. So you just keep on going, have good contacts to the ecosystem, and then always try to kind of already raise a little bit more than you need in there. And I think it's very important to have a good dialogue to investors and always be out there speaking to everybody, because the reality is you'll always need people at some point to join your story, and the more they know you, the easier it is.
So pick your investors wisely?
That one most definitely. Most definitely. Most definitely.
Amazing. And my last question for you, what can be a great last question? Well, when is SumUp going to be a decacorn?
I think that depends much more on the financing environment than on our performance.
Okay, so soon.
But you have a very optimistic outlook on the ecosystem, but you're closer to the capital, so you probably know better than me.
All right, thank you so much. Maybe I have a question. No Slido question, but you were talking about, sort of how obviously throughout those years, the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. You talked about runway. What's the lowest runway you ever had? Like, were there moments where it literally was like, I don't know how to pay salaries for next month? And how did you deal with that? Like, how do you...
All the time. I mean, in Germany, you have this problem that you might do Insolvenzverschleppung. So we told ourselves there's a very good chance that the money would come through in the next couple of weeks, but it was definitely very tight for a number of times, I would say. At least 2 or 3 times we hit like points where it was pretty unclear how we could make next month's salary bill.
And one more question around pivoting. That's sort of the startup lingo where everybody keeps talking about maybe you have to pivot. And I find it like maybe the toughest question often for entrepreneurs is to answer, am I on the right track and I just have to keep on going? Or should I really abort ship on this product, do a step function type of change and pivot into another direction? And we know both of these ways have worked for many founders out there. Have you ever been at that moment, and how did you make a decision?
I think the reality is on the product side, we didn't. So we also did very little A/B testing, research, and so on, because we were pretty sure accepting card payments for small merchants is a problem we want to solve, and that we have the right product for that one. What we changed a lot is the go-to-market, how to get merchants on the platform, what's the best approach, and all of those things. How do we set up the company? How do you organize the company fit for purpose? And all of those things, there we did a ton of things, I would say.
And what's lastly the climate like, you think, for IPOing? How do you view the market at the moment?
It depends very much who you're talking to, because all of those investment banks, since they don't have a ton of stuff to do, they keep on telling you the market is amazing and you should do an IPO, because obviously they want to generate fee income and do something useful. I don't know. I think that's maybe a question for the investors here. Since I'm just a consumer of capital, you're the holder of capital. How do you see the market for IPOs? I
mean, I would say that the bankers are actually quite busy with all the consolidation going on. So, yeah.
Structuring down rounds rather than taking companies public. One audience question just came in from Slido. Along your journey, what assumption was the most deceptive and left you in the biggest shock when you reached the reality check?
So when we started, we obviously were sure that we have the most amazing product in the world, which we still have today. It just was at the early stage not working exactly how you envisioned it, and there was a lot of stuff that was not really done. And we were just under the impression that it's just a race for land grabbing. We also had our friends at Rocket that launched a very similar product to ours. So it was literally just grow at all cost as fast as possible, in terms of also building up the teams, building up the go-to-market function, marketing spend. I think we could have been much smarter on this first scaling, where I think the first 6 to 12 months we wasted a lot of money trying to grow faster with something that just didn't work, that we could have done better. But at the same time, it's not like the environment allowed us that freedom, because also from the investor side, we were probably the first to start in Europe, and all of a sudden you had like 20 competitors. If you're not, I think we got the funding because we were in 10 countries, even if more than half the countries didn't work at all, by just being a differentiator to the other players in the market and thereby somehow get more investor interest.
Last audience question: what do you think of the competition? If every bank, ends up offering a device for payment.
I think the real competition is cash, because on the bank side, we don't see that much competition. We are today in 35 countries. I think the next biggest payment player at the point of sale is maybe in like 10 countries. So it's much more country per country competition. And a lot of banks try from time to time and then stop those efforts again. I actually think we have like 30, 40 banks co-distributing SumUp as kind of their own product. I think it's a very special space that we chose, this micro merchant long tail that's not easily served by somebody that has something else as a main mission and then wants to do this on the side.
Shilka, Marc, thank you very much for joining us
Thank you.
today. Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions.